we're going to be talking about getting a mortgage as a non-national or a foreign passport holder. This has actually been a challenge as of late, as one of the big lenders recently changed their lending rules. But all is not lost. Let's talk about the options in today's episode. Hello, welcome back to our channel and podcast. My name is Gemma, and here at WS we talk about all things relating to money, mortgages and positive money mindset. So if that interests you, then be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the thumbs up. It really helps with our YouTube algorithm and means that you won't miss out on any of our videos. On today's podcast of Let's Talk Money and Mortgages, we have Iftikhar here with us again. Iftikhar is a trained accountant and mortgage advisor who has been in the industry for over 10 years, and he is also one of the founding directors here at WIS. Welcome back, Ifti. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm very well. Thank you. How are you doing, Gemma?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. So today's video, let's just talk about the main changes then that took place in this space so that we can kind of let everybody know what happened.
Yeah, there's one of the big lenders who used to be very favorable towards foreign nationals. But unfortunately, a few weeks ago, they changed their rules, we call it lending criteria, towards foreign nationals. Where they said if you are a foreign national, you should have lived in the UK for 5 years. Or you should earn a combined income, say if it's a joint application of 100,000, or you need a minimum 25% deposit, right? So it's one of the three you have to meet, right? Now for a lot of people, that's a big jump, right? Because 100,000, how many people earn 100,000 combined income, right? So that became a bit of a challenge. So a lot of people kind of dropped out because of that. So that's the main change that happened. But the good news is they are not the only lender who sort of offer mortgages for foreign nationals. Of course, there's limited lenders in this space for sure. You have to give that, but it's not the end of the world, right? There might be certain things that you can do to make sure that it works, right? But yeah, those are the main changes that happened, which a lot of people are talking about at the moment.
Okay, so you mentioned there are alternatives. So what are the alternatives to this lender?
Okay, so the alternatives is there are a few lenders who are in this space anyway who offer mortgages for foreign nationals, right? There is a lender for a foreign national who will want a 10% deposit, right, as opposed to 25%. And the person should have lived in the UK for a minimum of 2 years. And there's no minimum income requirement as such, right? So it kind of ticks all those boxes which the other lender can't offer anymore, right? So you have that option. But obviously there are other lenders who might not need 25% deposit, or there are other lenders who will be a little bit more flexible on the period that you were in the UK. There might be some lenders who will work out using bespoke underwriting. So that's why I said it's not the end of the world. But if somebody's been in the UK for say 1.5 years, they may have to wait for another 6 months before they can get a mortgage. But in the grand scheme of things, I don't think it's the end of the world, right? 6 months is not a long period of time. Anyway, you got to build up your credit, right? So usually from what we see, people take a good 2 years before their credit scores become really good, right? So it's not a bad thing at all. But of course, we missed that big lender, but all what I'm saying is not the end of the world, right?
Yeah, you're right. And what about the visa type? How important is the visa type when you're getting this kind of mortgage?
Yeah, visa type is quite important, right? So let's take an example. If somebody is a student on a visa, it's very difficult to get a mortgage because you can't work effectively if you're a student, right? But if you're on a work visa, like a tier 2, right? Or if you're an investor, for people like that, or a highly skilled employee, banks look at those a little bit more favorably because they have the right to work in the UK. That means they can earn money. If they can earn money and they can prove their income, that is kind of easy for them to get a mortgage, right? But then, we have to think about things like Brexit as well, right? So before banks were very favorable towards people from the EU, right, who settled in the UK and who are doing work. But now there are some restrictions around that as well because they want to check whether right to work in the UK and things like that because rules have changed around a little bit. So if you're not really sure on that area, you definitely want to speak to an advisor because every bank has slightly different rules when it comes to foreign nationals, which kind of now includes most of the Europeans as well who've sort of recently come to the UK and who doesn't have a right to sort of settle in the UK, right? So be very careful in that area because the rules have changed. Another thing that you need to be mindful is, because we always see this, a lot of people come to us and say, my spouse is a student, but I have a right to work in the UK and I earn £100,000, right? But then because you're dependent on your spouse, banks don't always look at you favorably. But there might be, like I said, with bespoke lender, bespoke underwriting, we may be able to work this out, right? But you need to speak to some advisors, and if you just walk into X bank, they might not offer you anything, right? So that's where advisors can play a big part in trying to get you the mortgage.
Okay. And, obviously we know with regular mortgages that credit scores are very important.
Yeah.
But how does it work when you're a foreign national or you haven't maybe been in the country for very long? Are they more lenient with your credit score?
Unfortunately, I don't think so. Because if I am the bank, for me, a foreign national who doesn't have the rights to live in the UK permanently, it is perceived as a higher risk, right? So if you're perceived as a higher risk, the bank will always look at your scores a little bit more closely. So therefore, I don't think that's really helpful as such if your credit scores are low. So you need to work on your credit scores for sure. Obviously, people coming from abroad is always at a disadvantage because what happens is they got to build credit scores from zero, right? You've been living in the UK for the last 15 years. You can trace where you live. You can trace whether you in the voters register. You may have had some kind of mobile phone contract or something like that, which kind of helps you build your credit score. But for somebody who's come from abroad, whose address cannot easily be even traced because it's not in the system as such, right? For people like that, it's harder to build their credit scores. So if you're thinking of buying a property while you're in UK, always best to speak to advisors. Make sure that you're building your credit score. Very important things like your addresses. Just make sure the addresses are correct in the credit file. Get onto the voters register. All those things. The advisors can help you, right?
I was just about to ask you if you had any tips to improve the credit score.
Okay, cool. Yeah, voters list is very important, right? Gov.uk is the government website. You can go there. There is a place where you can register to be a voter. If you're living in a property, register as a voter, right? So you can vote next time as well. Plus, it helps you with your credit score, right? So that's quite important. Banks don't like if you change addresses regularly. I mean, this is a thing I've been noticing looking at credit files. So they like stable addresses. So as much as possible, try not to move houses, right? If you have too many changes, banks think they're not stable, right? So therefore, it can be a bit of a downer for your credit score. I know when you come into the country, you don't really know much, but try not to move too much if you can avoid it, right? Other things to note is think about your credit commitments, right? Unlike a lot of other countries, which I've spoken to my clients about, they don't have this system as such. So they're not used to direct debit systems. They're used to paying bills when the bills come, right? But it doesn't quite work that way in the UK. The more direct debits you have, the banks can easily track what you do and whether you're honoring your commitments, right? So that's what banks always want to track. So if the bank sees you regularly honoring your debt, banks love it, right? Because they know that, okay, this person has been honoring their debt. Very likely they will honor the mortgage as well. So that's the way they like to think, right? So if you're getting a phone, if you're paying for utilities, whatever it is, those things can easily go on direct debit, right? Don't go to the bank and pay. Don't do that, right? Set up direct debits. It'll always help. Try to refrain from taking loans, right? Loans sometimes are unavoidable, but as much as possible don't, because A, it affects the amount you can borrow. B, it can affect your credit scores as well, right? Because the bank perceives that being a big debt, they might not like it, right? If somebody's had a loan, they take time to assess that as well, right? Because they'll watch it over a period of time before your credit scores start to improve, right? Credit cards is not a bad thing so long as it's under control, right? A lot of people, especially when you come from abroad, have like a beginner's credit card sort of thing, right? It's fine having one. But please, if you're interested in a mortgage, and as a good practice as well, please settle it in full, right? Set up a direct debit so that at the end of the month, all the payments go off your bank account and you don't have to worry about going and settling debt, and it won't affect your credit score as well, right? And the important thing about credit cards is you don't take multiple credit cards. I hear people saying, it's a good idea to have 5 credit cards. But banks worry because you have 5 credit cards, let's say have £2,000 each, right? They know you can overnight borrow 10,000, right? So they worry about those things. So don't unnecessarily get credit cards. And if you do use a credit card, try not to go to the max limit, right? So if you have a limit of say £5,000, right, doesn't mean that you should be using 4,000 and settling it in full, right? Because banks worry then because they think you don't know to manage your finances. So therefore, don't do that, right? Try to always stick to the basic stuff, right? Also, banks like to go through your bank statements, right? So make sure it's clean. Overdrafts, not very favorable, especially if it's unauthorized overdraft, it's even worse, right? Also, look at your expenditure on your statement, right? Don't have unusual expenses. Like if you go to, say, a supermarket, that's fine. If it's just standard expenses, banks are okay. But don't have extraordinary expenses, right? Because if you have a lot of entertainment and things like that, it goes down as a commitment, right? Banks do look at these things. So be very careful with that. So I think those are the things that you can do. If your credit score is okay, it always gets you closer to getting a mortgage because I know some of those variables, like the time you lived in the UK and how much deposit you have, sometimes you have no control over, but this you do have a control, right? To a good extent you do have a control, so try and control this as much as you can.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks, Ifti. I was wondering, is the time in the UK an important factor in getting a mortgage as a foreign national?
Yes, definitely it is. For example, I worked with a client recently. He was in the UK for about 4 years. He went to Netherlands. He's come back right after a year. So his clock only starts from the time he came back. So that's the important thing. So time in the UK is always important. Generally, if you have about 2 years, it's important. It helps you build your credit score for sure. But at the same time, it helps you get the mortgage as well, right? So that's important. Just make sure that you have time in your visa left as well, right? Because most of the time, the Home Office give you a visa which is valid for 3 years, right? So if your visa is 2 years and 8 months, banks get a little scared because they normally say, okay, have about 6 months left in your visa. So you need to make sure that there is sufficient time, because they don't know what will happen to you if it's like 2 years and 8 months, because you only have 4 months to go, right? So if the employer is not happy to sponsor you, then there is a problem, right? So banks get a little jittery about those things, right? So don't leave it till the end if you're interested in a house. So just make sure that you have 6 months left, at least 6 months left, right? Because that's quite important. Also, this is the thing that gets people sometimes, your passport. Sometimes you have a visa, but your passport expires in 4 months, right? That's something that can be negative. It's nothing to do with the visa, but your travel document is only valid for 4 months, right? Which is less than 6 months, right? Bank looks at that as well, right? So that can put you down as well, right? So because banks don't like documents which are expiring soon. So those are little things you can do which could make a difference in getting the mortgage,
Yeah, and I was wondering about the employment contract type. Is that important?
It is important because banks like stability, banks like to know who's the employer. Because like I said, with foreign nationals, it is a risk bank is taking, right? Because they didn't have enough time to judge the person, one thing, right? Because most of the time they've only lived in the UK for a short period of time. It's not only that, but they are taking a risk on you, right? And you're always perceived as a higher risk, right? So therefore, that is quite important. So they will look at your contract. Usually open-ended contracts are always helpful, like a proper sort of employment contract is what the banks are after. But something very important in the contract, they look at the composition of your pay as well, right? Because some companies like to pay you basic salary, living allowance, travel allowance. So those, sometimes banks look at it in a slightly different way, right? So if it's a travel allowance, they're like, oh, you might not be traveling, it's COVID now, right? So are you entitled for the allowance? Those are the kind of questions that come through. Because when you ask the client, they say, oh, I earn £50,000, right? Which is great, but it's got the breakup, right? So because some banks are okay with it and some banks are not, right? So that type of employment is important. I mean, for various good reasons, I'm sure the companies do this. But from a mortgage point of view, it might not be a very good option for you, right? So again, if you have something like that, because these are all not the most straightforward transactions, speak to an advisor, because advisors can guide you, right? It's very, very important that you do that, because otherwise what will happen is, this particular person will go to the bank and then make an application, and the bank will say, sorry, you don't earn 50,000. As per way of evaluating, you're only earning 40,000, so you can't afford them. So you've already suffered on your credit score. And obviously, as a foreign national, you are always in a bit of a back foot, because when you start off with this, credit scores are always low, right? So you don't want that to happen. So it's always good to speak to someone here.
Well, thank you again, Ifti, for some more great advice. I just wanted to put a reminder out there that these points may or may not be applicable to everybody. So please do reach out to an advisor if you're unsure whether they're suitable for you. If you don't have an advisor, I will leave our contact details below, as we are always happy to help here at WIS. Another reminder that as a mortgage is secured against your home or property, it may be repossessed if you do not keep up with the mortgage repayments. Thank you for joining us again today. We'll be back next week with another episode of Let's Talk Money and Mortgages. Have a great day, stay safe, and we'll see you again soon.